A mother wrote as follows: I brought up my daughters to dress modestly in accordance with halakha. Unfortunately, I have a married daughter who wears pants, including when she and her family come to us for Shabbat. We find this unacceptable and recently decided to put our foot down. I spoke to our daughter and told her that henceforth she may not come to our house wearing pants. Her response was that if so, she will no longer come to us for Shabbat. We find her response both outrageous and depressing. Can the rabbi provide us with any guidance?
The first thing that comes to my mind, hearing such a story, is that we are dealing with a truly tragic situation. Tragic on many levels. It is tragic, first of all, that children who received a solid, well-grounded Torah education, not at all extreme or strange, simply based on normative halachic standards. With regards to dress for women, shall we say, it was made clear to them, this is how they were brought up, if we're talking about women, girls, women, that they should wear skirts, and obviously of the appropriate length, and not pants. When a child rejects entirely reasonable and normative halachic standards that child received at home, and very possibly, very likely in school as well, perhaps also in the entire community in which that person grew up. When such things are rejected, that is in of itself a very serious tragedy. It is also furthermore tragic on a second, an additional level, namely that I am aware, simply by noting what goes on around me, what I see in the Dati Leumi, so-called national religious or religious Zionist world, I see that this phenomenon is widespread, very widespread. And that itself is also a tragedy, that we're not talking about an issue which affects one family or 50 families or 100 families. We're talking about a systemic problem. And this, of course, is very worrying, very disturbing, and it raises the question why this is so. And I'm not convinced that that stream of Torah Judaism in Israel today, or overseas for that matter, I'm not convinced that it is being addressed correctly or sufficiently, with sufficient seriousness, with appropriate deliberation, and with a proper sense of urgency. It is also tragic on an additional, on a third level, and that is the friction between the parents and the children, or if you want, the generation of the grandparents and the generation of their children who also have children, and therefore we're talking also about grandchildren. We're talking about a three-generational situation, and this can have a very deleterious effect on the relationships within that family. And it is furthermore tragic on a fourth level, and that is the fact that parents have to even speak to their children about such a thing. In other words, I'm not referring here to the tragedy that the children are not adhering to halakha and to that which their parents taught them is correct and true. I'm referring to the fact that even if a child decides to deviate from what is correct and what is true and what is based on the Torah and what the halakha requires and what his or her parents expected and taught this person, even if a child has made that decision, which in itself is tragic, it is doubly tragic that the child does not understand that, well, even if I decided to live in this way and to change my behavior, my halachic standards, etc., not that there is such an halachic standard that I'm aware of, at least, that can legitimize or justify a woman wearing pants. If there are such people who think so, then I would be pleased to hear what their halachic arguments are. I cannot think of any reasonable halachic arguments which would suggest that it is correct or reasonable for a woman to do so. Even if a child made that decision and chooses to live in that way and to dress that way at home or at their place of work or in the street, the child should have enough kibud av v'em. The child should have enough respect for his or her parents. The child should understand, first of all, because we're discussing the child's parents, and second of all, because we're discussing the child coming to another home. That is to say, it's not their own home we're discussing now. The child, let's say a married woman, a young married woman, she lives in her own home, and there she does as she sees fit, whether the parents like it or not. But surely she should see that if she insists on doing the same thing in her parents' home, then essentially she is behaving in a manner which is simply lacking in any basic decency and derech eretz. A person, when in the home of another person, even if it is your parent, it is not your home any longer. You're not a child, you're not living under that roof. You're coming to another person's home. And there, if you act in a manner which makes the ba'alei habayit, the owners of that home, the masters of that house, and in this case your parents, if you make them feel uncomfortable in their own home, so that your arrival in their home is, on the one hand, perhaps a cause of joy and happiness, and on the other hand, at the very same time, also a cause for sadness and ambivalence, that itself is tragic, that the child does not see that at least in his or her parents' home he should and must act in a manner which does not cause anguish and heartache and anxiety to his or her parents. And the fact that these things are not clear to so many young people today is truly a tragedy in and of itself, quite apart from the objective reality that we're talking about a Jew who was brought up according to the Torah and has decided to take a step back, at least one step back or two steps back from those normative Torah standards, normal expected modes of behavior, of dress, etc., that is expected from a Torah Jew, not from a great rabbi or from the family of a great rabbi, not from a particularly pious individual, but from any regular Jew who wishes to see themselves as a religious Jew, as an Orthodox religious Jew. If these things are not clear, well, this is truly a tragedy. It is heartbreaking in my eyes. Now, as for parents who find themselves in this unfortunate situation, there are basically two choices. The parents can either choose to live with this very unsatisfactory and very painful reality. And I have heard such tales of woe from a number of parents. how it introduces an atmosphere into their home which is foreign to them, which is very disturbing to them. We're also talking of a situation in which there may be other children involved, shall we say unmarried children who are living at home, who were brought up as their older siblings were brought up, and now they see that their older siblings no longer live according to these rules, to these halachic principles, to some of the basic concepts of Torah Judaism, and modesty and dress code, an appropriate dress code in the home, in public, wherever, are very important, very fundamental and crucial issues in Judaism. It's not that everything in Judaism is decided by how a person dresses. That's not true. And a person can dress correctly and do many other things that are very incorrect and very improper and perhaps even criminal. But that is not to say that issues of dress code, modesty, propriety, etc. are not relevant. That is also entirely spurious. Sometimes these young people respond to their parents who complain about the way they dress with the following comment. They say, well, all you care about is the external things, the way I look, the way I dress, but you don't care about what's going on inside me, what kind of a person I am, whether I'm kind, whether I'm moral, whether I'm honest. But this, of course, is a non sequitur. There's no connection between the first statement and the second. In other words, of course the parent cares whether their child is moral, kind, honest, a good upstanding citizen in many ways. But this has nothing to do with the question of how they dress and if they're dressing correctly and properly in a manner that is fitting for a Torah Jew. So to claim that if you say something about the way I dress, this shows that you do not care about other aspects of my character and my behavior, that's entirely spurious. That's entirely irrelevant. To claim that only those other things count and that modesty and dress do not count for anything, that's entirely not true. To claim the opposite, that only dress and modesty are important, and what goes on inside a person's heart and mind, and a person's midot, a person's character traits, etc., are not so important or not important at all, that of course is also untrue. Judaism is a system which has a lot to say about all of these aspects of life. In fact, there is no aspect of life, of human life and of Jewish life, that the Torah does not have something to say about. And that is exactly how it should be, because if a system is a system for life, for the individual, for the community and for the nation, then of course it has something to say, in fact a lot to say, about absolutely everything, about personal conduct, about how a family should conduct itself, individuals, how a community should be run, how a nation should run itself, for instance, governance, what form of government, what kind of regime does the Torah mandate. All these things are discussed in the Torah. And even mundane things like dress are discussed and are important, because that is the way of the world. That is the norm in human affairs, that appearances make a difference, modesty and dress make a difference, and any reasonable person understands this. I can mention here in passing that I saw, I think it was in the New York Times, if not mistaken, recently, that many people, we're talking here about Gentiles in North America, are finding themselves very much challenged with the question of how guests, people they invite to a wedding, for example, that they're making, how to deal with the fact that many people, many we're talking about women apparently, obviously, come to such events dressed inappropriately. In other words, even in the Gentile world, reasonable, normal people who have not been completely debased by the current absurd and vulgar state of Western society, people who have not been debased in such a way understand very well that it is entirely inappropriate for a woman to come dressed in an extremely provocative manner to a formal affair, and there's no reason why such affairs should turn into something akin to a bikini contest. And that is exactly, unfortunately, what goes on, and this is what I saw recently in the New York Times. It has nothing to do with Judaism. How much more so do Jews and does Jewish society have to say about such matters, because our standards are and should be higher than those of people who read the New York Times, or people whose cultural compass is in tune with that of the New York Times. So, to return to the point at hand, as mentioned before, very often there are other people in the house, not just the parents, younger children, who will see a very negative example of behavior, not in accordance with halakha, not in accordance with the way they are being brought up. And if these older siblings, for example, are allowed to visit, to spend a Shabbat at home, dressing in any manner that they please, this must send a negative message to those other children, and there is a serious issue of parental responsibility in terms of the education of those other children. These are the things that need to be taken into account. So, practically, parents in this unfortunate situation have two options. One option is to bite the bullet, so to speak, and not make an issue of it. Perhaps bring it up and talk about it very gently, and explain that it's very difficult and painful for them, and also it undermines perhaps what they're trying to do in terms of their children's education, and then accept whatever emerges from such a conversation, because the married daughter, for example, in this case, may understand, as she obviously should. If she didn't understand before, it's certainly high time now, if the parent points this out to her, that there is a problem, and the problem is what she's doing, and could she perhaps not do this any longer. It's possible the daughter will take this to heart, and even though she doesn't think it's necessary or correct, but she will understand that she has to respect her parents and their home and their feelings and their expectations of what they want to see and what they can accept going on in their home. And that would be the positive outcome of such a conversation. Or that married daughter, again in this case, to take this example, could turn around and say, well, if that's the case, I won't come for Shabbat, which is, as the mother who wrote suggested, that this is first of all outrageous, because that was not the point. The point was to express the fact that what this married daughter in this case is doing is offensive, is very problematic, is injecting a very serious element of friction and tension into the parent-child relationship, perhaps also with the grandchildren, and therefore this cannot continue. With regards to the question, what should parents in this situation do? Should they say something? Should they say nothing? First of all, they could say nothing and just accept reluctantly that which is going on, even though it's outrageous and can easily be understood as something that should anger them and insult them. Nevertheless, they can accept what is happening because they prefer not to get into an argument with their child. The parents can also, as suggested a moment ago, speak about it, raise the issue, and express their feelings without any kind of ultimatum. Or, and hopefully, if they choose that path, then the child will understand and will come around. And that would be perhaps the best outcome, at least for the time being. Ideally, we would want to see such a person who has strayed from the correct path to return to the correct path of Torah Judaism. But at least for the time being, if a reasonably open and non-threatening conversation can bring about that kind of result, that would be the ideal outcome. Third of all, if that does not work, the third option is possibly to make it clear that you are no longer willing to accept this reality. And then, I believe it's up to the child. If the child says, well, you're rejecting me, well, it should be pointed out that the opposite is in fact true. You, the child, are the one who has rejected both our education, the way we try to bring you up, and you are rejecting entirely reasonable normative halachic standards. You are the one who has made the change which has brought about this tension in the relationship, and really it's your choice whether it's so important to you, in the case of this particular married woman, to wear pants in our house. Is that more important to you than the family connection and relationship now and in the future, or not? That's your choice, not our choice. But for you to dictate to us and to impose upon us that which you wish to do, which we cannot prevent you doing in your own life, but to impose that upon us in our own home, that is unacceptable. And that is actually a tremendous chutzpah, and something with which we cannot live, we cannot accept. Those are the options. There is no clear guideline in the Torah what a parent should do in this situation. A person has to be aware of all the options and all the possible outcomes, and essentially make their own decision. So in effect, this is a decision, or these are decisions that a person or a couple, a husband and a wife, faced with such a set of circumstances, these are decisions they must consider seriously and reach a conclusion. And one must know that not infrequently in life, in general, and with reference to the Torah perhaps even more so, there is a price to be paid for standing up for one's principles. The principles here are, first of all, what the Torah expects and demands of a Jew, any Jew. And second of all, another principle here is one of basic decency and Derech Eretz, which is that even without any reference to Judaism, a person can demand how other people behave and what they do and do not do in their home. Every normal person would accept that a person can tell other people coming to their home that we do not allow smoking in our home. And it's not necessary to have a huge sign on the wall in big red letters, thank you for not smoking. It's simply enough to say once that we don't have any smoking in our home, it bothers us greatly, and that's it. And a normal person gets the message. And a person who does not get the message, well, imagine how angered and how outraged most people would be, if not just about every person who does not want another person to smoke in their home. And this was made clear to the other person, and the other person comes and visits and says hello, and then decides to light up anyhow. that is not a situation which is going to endure for long. That situation will come to a head, will explode. And we all know exactly who in that situation is in the wrong. And how exactly this situation that we're discussing here, with regards to dress codes, modesty, halakha, etc., how this is different, I do not know. In fact, it's the same, but much more serious, much more crucial than smoking, which is itself a very serious issue, because we know that passive smoking is also dangerous, not to mention the fact that a person simply says, "That's very unpleasant, and I don't like it in my home," etc. So these issues exist both within the realm and within the frame of reference of Judaism, and in other frames of reference that have nothing to do with Judaism. It has to do with basic decency and interpersonal relations. As a final note, I would say that it is more difficult, perhaps much more difficult, to make a demand and stick to it when you have allowed a certain situation to deteriorate. In this case, if the married daughter who decided to wear pants has been coming to the home for some time and has been allowed to get away with this, and then the parents change their tune, that is to say, they decide they can no longer stand this state of affairs and they are going to put an end to it, that is very often going to be more difficult and more volatile a situation than if they shut the whole thing down at the very outset. In other words, if parents see that their married daughter has chosen to wear pants, for example, before she even comes home the first time wearing pants, at that point, in my view, they should say to her, "What you do outside our home may disturb us, may cause us pain and anguish," and that in itself is a reason for you perhaps to reconsider what you're doing, even if you think it's perfectly all right, objectively. But apart from that, what you choose to do outside our home we cannot control, but we will not allow this in our home. If that is made clear, absolutely clear and stated in a firm and resolute manner from the outset, before the situation gets out of hand, I believe the way forward will be much less bumpy and less fraught with tension and general suffering and pain within the family. So it's better to deal with issues either before they arise or at the very first moment that they appear, and not to allow things to spiral out of control.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael, or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.